Welcome to Tech Conversations with Grace Chng. This is a podcast series by News on Tech. It is a tech website that seeks to raise the business leaders' intelligence on emerging and future technologies. Today, I'm excited to have two data experts to do a deep dive into data, to navigate the challenges and opportunities that data presents with AI. My two guests are Dr. Geraldine Wong, who is a data scientist with a PhD in statistics. And she's the Chief Data Officer of GXS Bank, a full-fledged digital bank offering services to consumers and enterprises. She's building the bank's AI and data strategy, reimagining the way you provide digital services. Nick is part of the unicorn data company, Databricks, which provides cloud-based solutions for data analysis and AI. Now, Databricks, as listeners would know, has just raised a record funding round of $10 billion in US. Indeed, again, that's a conversation for another day. But in Asia Pacific and Japan, Nick is Vice President for Field Engineering, where he engages with many businesses. Welcome, Geraldine and Nick, to this podcast because you offer from a user business perspective and Nick offers from a technology perspective. So let's dive directly in and talk about the foundational role of data infrastructure and the importance of data quality in the AI era. So for the last 2 years, as I speak to many customers, businesses and tech providers, they have raised this question of the importance of data and clean data. So Geraldine, maybe you start, and highlight the critical role of high quality data. But take it from the perspective of how does poor data quality impact model performance and what are the potential risks?
I think there's the common saying of garbage in, garbage out. Right. Whatever you put into the model, is whatever outputs you're going to get from there, and what trustworthiness of the data your business stakeholders will also get from there. So I think we start off from a few dimensions of data and the quality of it. What does data quality mean to businesses like us as well, especially in a very regulated, highly regulated industry? And how we use the data in the various means to help take on business decision making. So a few ways. The top of mind, credit risk modeling, right? How you offer credit risk to customers is based off the data that they provided you, as well as the data that you know of them. So in a bank, if you think about it, the transactional data that they have of the customers, the demographics, the profile, and for us as GXS Bank, where we have ecosystem partners like Grab and Singtel, we rely a lot on the data sharing coming from our Grab and Singtel partners, all through consent, I must say. Right? Yeah. And this means that we there's a high dependency on the data quality before we give off risk-based pricing, interest loans to our unsecured lending to our customers as well. So it means that having a complete set of what Nick looks like and the consistency of the transactions that come in as well, right? How often does the data come in to be able to consistently, give him the right products at the right time? Is the right interest rate given to him the best one for him or not, right? I think as we move into the era of Gen AI, that's even more so. We've got the large language models that the big companies, I'm sure Databricks also has a lot of large language models that rely on public data. But how do you make it more relevant to the business itself? I think a lot of companies have used RAGs on their own knowledge retrieval system. But again, how accurate are you able to retrieve your information internally to help productivity? It's also dependent on how you store your data, how you label your data, how you tag your data internally as well.
So if you don't do that correctly, you're not going to get good model performance.
Yes.
Okay.
And maybe I'll just even go to the even fundamental data quality. A lot of times organizations don't even know if a tenure of a customer, what does it mean? The definitions of tenure of customer could mean different things. For example, is it the tenure that you first joined the bank, or is it the tenure that you first took up this product? There's a very subtle differences here. And this relies a lot also on the business inputs. Because if the business define it the way they think about it, when they use it later, then it helps them as well.
So how do you collect this holistic, comprehensive data points?
Yeah, so it's very tedious, right? Onboarding, it's a very tedious and thankless task, I must say. So when you onboard the system, of course, you go back to the business and say, hey, this upstream data that you're collecting, what is needed? How do you define it? Please help us as well.
Right.
And here we're actually leveraging a little bit of Gen AI to put context in there. Because 4 years ago when we first started, there was no Gen AI, so it was all manual input, right? So now that you have context into what some of this data is, you can have the first upload of data definition with Gen AI. But of course, the human then have the lens of reviewing that definition as a second pair of eyes as well. So it constantly needs revisions on the definitions as the product also evolves along the way as well.
So holistic data, you need to collect holistic data, and you need to continually update and test, I guess, so in order to get good model performance. Nick, what can you add to that from your perspective?
Yeah, no, I think you put it really well. A couple of other things around data quality from more technology perspective. There's things that you need to consider from a principles perspective around the completeness. Do we have the full picture that is represented by this data? Do we have the right consistency with regards to the format of the data? As you can imagine, in a bank, in any enterprise, you're typically pulling this data from multiple systems of record, from multiple discrete inputs, and each of those could have different formats. How do you ensure that they conform to something that is in line with the expectations around how this data will be leveraged to serve consumers, citizens, and such forth? And the other part is the timeliness of the data, because there's no point in having a complete picture and consistency if the data is a year old, right? Everyone wants instant gratification with regards to the products and services that they're consuming. So timely data is really, really important, not just for the quality of the outcome, but the quality of the experience.
So in association with that, what are customers telling you?
Yeah, so the customers are telling us that absolutely AI is a top-level agenda. But 80% of the problem is data preparation and quality. So whilst they have these fantastic, innovative AI, generative AI outcomes that they want to drive, more often than not, customers hit a barrier post-development and testing around having the requisite data to actually support quality outcomes for the consumers and citizens that they want to serve. And that's the biggest barrier. 80% of the time, it is data quality.
Geraldine, apart from data quality, privacy is also an issue, especially in your domain, highly regulated. How do you go about ensuring privacy and security of the data and preventing misuse?
So maybe I'll start with 3 years ago when we first started the bank. There was also IMDA. I'll put a plug in here for the IMDA Data Protection Trust Mark. And that Data Protection Trust Mark actually assesses organizations on the robust practices, guidelines, and tools that you use within the bank. So there was external auditors that come in and look at your practices, your policies, how you're leveraging of PII information or personal identification information in the bank. Within the bank, not everyone, I would say only a handful of people have access to PII data. And it's only a need-to basis as well. And right now, I think a lot of the tokenization, anonymization of data is being done so that when we put it into the big models, you can't identify people in there as well.
So you anonymize the data.
That's right. And there's many privacy enhancing techniques that we have actually looked at, like homomorphic encryption and all of this as well.
Yep, no, I think that's absolutely accurate. In addition to that, it fundamentally comes down to how do you govern, control, secure, and assure the data.
The governance.
The governance piece is hugely important. So part of that is not only the attribute, perhaps, based access control or the role-based access control that you enforce on these data sets, but also the lineage. How have they evolved over time? Who's touched them? Who's modified them? For what end? That's really, really important to determine.
So you need to have an audit process, audit trail.
Correct. Because you're going to inevitably be asked, how did you derive this outcome? How did you derive this decision? And on what basis? So it's really important to understand how that data is flowing through the life cycle and how it changes over time and who touched it and why and what modifications did they make.
I mean, if you go into the whole data governance framework I think the roles and responsibility are quite important. So you spoke about data stewards. There's also data owners as well. Who's the right data owner?
Yep.
What is their role? The technical data steward, the business data stewards, all of that has to flow in place in the whole data lifecycle management.
Okay, I'm curious. Is there a superman, superwoman that holds the keys to all the data and who has the ultimate control?
I would say in our organization, the data owners all are the keys.
Okay.
So I'm only one part of the filter or one part of the decision-making process.
Okay, so the key shouldn't just remain with one person.
I think it's interesting. There's different models, and I think it really depends on the business context, the maturity of the customer, and the industry that they're in. In some, it may be that it falls upon one person to own both the strategy and the execution of how that forms in the way of a technology implementation. In others, it may be more federated due to geographical, political, security concerns around residency or sovereignty. And you just got to find the balance that works for your business and your business model.
Right. So when data became very important, storage became very important, and access to that data became very important. So suddenly cloud has become popular, and it's being hyped again, right? But there are different cloud environments. Today we have public, we have hybrid, and we have on-prem. So Nick, what are the cost implications of moving and managing data across these environments?
Yeah. Maybe if we start with on-prem. So on-prem, absolutely a topology that's in play for many companies still today. A couple of things that are obviously positives around that. It's your infrastructure, you control it. It's got a high capital expenditure initially for the outlay, but you can depreciate those assets over time. And for some, that's a pretty good way to go. The cons with that, obviously from a cost perspective, is it's not just the infrastructure. It's all of the administration, operational effort on top that is often overlooked because the infrastructure needs to have great data and AI tools running on top of them, and stitching those together, integrating them, testing them, validating that, and making sure that they are working robustly, securely. It's a lot of effort and a lot of engineering time and money that potentially may not be additive to the business model. Is that really what you need to do to drive a differentiated product and service? So that's always been the sort of counter argument to on-prem. Hybrid is a state in which you have some of both. You have the best of both in theory, where you have some workloads running on-premise and some workloads running in the cloud. The complexity there is, how do you ensure consistency between the stacks? So now it's not just infrastructure,
Right.
It's the stack that you put on-prem. How can you replicate that in the cloud? Because more often than not, these are cloud-native services with their own API standards, their own release schedules. They're constantly evolving. Whereas on-premise, it's hard to sustain and conform to how that cloud is moving. So that would be the cons there. And then you've got to really think about data gravity. So where's the center of gravity for that data? And you really want to process it where it lies ideally. You want to limit data movement, because any data movement from on-prem into the cloud or vice versa is potentially going to incur significant costs, what we call data egress costs.
Yeah.
So that would be hybrid. And then cloud, obviously, utopian view on everything. And I'm a big proponent of cloud, obviously, with us being a cloud provider of data and AI platform capability on top of all the major clouds. The benefit there is the elasticity, the consumption model, the ability to pay for use, and really to seize and adopt at rapid pace all the latest innovations on top of the latest iterations of hardware, software, and analytical tools and techniques. And you get a much faster sort of evolution cycle around adopting the bleeding edge of technology. There you have to have more thought process, though, again, around how do I ensure that I govern and control those costs, not spinning out of control?
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to get up and running, and it's very easy to get to business value.
Yeah.
But you've got to be super thoughtful around how you constrain it, how you control it, how you measure it, and how you have the financial operational best practices to control cost over time. But it can be incredibly additive to value realization. It's probably the fastest way to get to value. You've just got to be thoughtful around how you manage the costs.
Yeah, but for businesses, Geraldine, thought needs to go into it, right? Cloud, the data is traveling up and down. Obviously, every time it moves, you got to pay. So what is it? Is it always a hybrid model for you?
So I've been on both sides of the spectrum, being fully on-prem and being on cloud. And I completely agree with what Nick had to say. Wanted to double-click on that part about being educated. I think the people on cloud needs to be educated
100%.
how to optimize some of the workflows. Your coding needs to change because the way you code can significantly affect the cost as well. The retrieval of data as and when you need it, it also affects all of that. And how you build your models, how you monitor your models, all is affecting the cloud compute costs as well. But I'm also a big fan of being on cloud because the scalability. And I think now with the large language models, every organization, you have greater access to what they have already built upon. So you can actually build upon that to have your own smaller fine-tuned model, for example. And the go-to-market speed is much faster as well.
Yeah, but you have your AI model, I suppose it's a hybrid most of the time, right? But for inferencing, and that's what most day-to-day you would need to do, how would you reduce your costs?
It depends on the type of use cases, especially with, is it a 24/7 latency? What kind of latency would you need from inferencing? Is it on the go kind of thing? Then, of course, the low latency, the cost would be affected by that as well. But if it's a more stable type of model where it's a batch processing, then those costs are being managed.
Right, okay. Nick, so when it comes to inferencing,
Yeah.
and that's usually on your desktop, or
Could
on
be.
your devices, right? Is there a cost implication on hardware infrastructure setup as well?
Yeah, maybe just to go back a step to go forward. Historically, we've always spoken a lot around training and training costs, and obviously there is cost incurred there, but increasingly we're seeing the costs of inference being underestimated.
Yes.
Inference, it could be, to your point, it could be that it's on the edge. It's often actually a model serving infrastructure that may be centralized, and products and services are hitting that centralized model serving endpoint for inference tasks. The issue there is, to your point, one, what do you need in the way of tokens per second? What do you need in the way of queries per second? And how does that trend over time? And more often than not, that is highly spiky, especially if you've got a great product and service, because when it gets around and everybody wants to consume it, so it'll spike quite significantly. Doing that on something that's static hardware that you've deployed, really hard to do. That's where the cloud elasticity comes in, and it's super, super beneficial. But again, that can run away if you're not thoughtful around what are you putting on that model serving endpoint. So you want to make sure the model is as small and as efficient and lightweight as possible, and really only serving that discrete task. And this is where we're seeing more and more customers move away from massively large language models, because they don't need it to solve my son's maths equations. They just need it to answer specific questions around their product and service. Those lightweight, highly tailored models on model serving endpoints are far more efficient and effective, and they can scale really well.
Okay, I'm curious in Asia, because we have countries that have got huge landmass and rural areas as well. So when you want to deploy that particular service across countries and cities as well as rural areas, how do you do that? Because power, accessibility, energy is always an issue, right?
Yeah.
So are there cost implications here? This is on the edge.
Yes, on the edge for sure. In an edge deployment pattern, you'd have to be pretty thoughtful around what are you deploying it on the edge, and so you'd need to be pretty thoughtful around what you're putting out on the edge. Again, though, I'd say 99% of products and services are typically more centralized, right, within a geographical location, and it just makes far more sense than having to manage multiple edge devices and edge deployments, and how do you keep those then in sync, and how do you ensure there's resilience at the edge? That becomes very complex. And nowadays, the latency, especially with things like 5G and so forth, interacting with these shared endpoints that are co-located geographically, it isn't as big a deal as most people make out.
From your perspective, do you have to face that as well on the edge?
Not so much. Well, the bank operates in both Malaysia and Singapore as well.
Right.
So there's no such challenges on that. Yeah.
Okay.
But maybe we double click on that multimodality. And I was going to say that with the trying to cost reduce, and you were saying smaller models for each type of task, very specific task, and that's I think the way forward.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. And increasingly, you're not seeing them operate independently. So there's this whole concept of agentic frameworks or agentic AI.
Right.
Yeah.
So it could be that, for discrete steps in a customer journey, there's actually different fine-tuned models that are doing different discrete tasks. One that's doing some sort of computer vision technique, one that's doing some sort of summarization, and then one that's doing more, generative sort of text construction or the playback to the customer. So these things are typically chained together nowadays. And also the orchestration across that to make that happen efficiently and effectively so that the latency is low is really, really important.
So how do you prepare the data for the agentic AI? Is there a special way of doing it, or do you have to be really on top of things?
I don't think there's any difference with how we are doing it today with the large language models. I think it's more being specific about what tasks your model is meant to run for as one whole part of the agentic workflow, A to B to C component up to Z.
Yeah.
What is each of them fetching from which vector database?
Right.
You have to have the data stored properly as well and in a quality manner and all of that. But it needs to be very specific to the needs of the task that you're trying to cooperate.
Okay.
And then have that good handshake between each module to the other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to change the conversation a bit to business transformation and the application of data and AI in the enterprise. Geraldine, businesses are already deeply involved in this data-driven transformation. What are the key strategic decisions businesses need to urgently meet in order to leverage data efficiently in AI?
Yeah, I think we could go on forever
Yeah.
with this topic. Maybe so maybe the top few points that I think I observed at least. A lot of organizations might not even have a unified data strategy.
Right.
There's many data silos.
So that's the first thing they should do. Consolidate.
But they also need to know where their data point sits because the longer the organization has been, they have created data in pockets and silos, and they really need to do almost like an inventory of where all their data sits. What do they need? I think retention policies and all of that. What needs to decommission to the point about costs as well. So I think you need to first break down those silos and have those unified data strategy. And then we go to the point of data governance, data security, because we spoke a lot about that as well. So that's in order. Then after that, we go into data IT infrastructure. Scalable? How do we make it go to market quickly? I think I'll leave that to Nick to speak more about that and double click into this. But I think the last point I want to add is more from a business stakeholder standpoint and buy-in. A lot of times there's no clear matrix of success as well. Yes. There is expectations that all these Gen AI large language models should perform at 100% performance when we as humans don't even do that.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of customer center agents, right? You call the customer center agents, you might think that they would give you the accurate answer to your question.
Yes.
But it could be based on their assumption, reading through the materials that they have. Yeah. Compare that to a chatbot that is all based on large language models. It could give you a factual answer, but it might not be the 100%, but close enough, right? So it's also the understanding from business and their expectations on such bots that we create. What is that matrix of success? They need to have clarity on that as well. And I think today that there is a gap.
So is that the reason why there are many POCs, but smaller number get into deployment company-wide? Is that what you're seeing?
It's part of the problem, 100%. I would agree with you. We always say business strategy informs data strategy, which informs the technical strategy, and it needs to be underpinned by a sound base of talent, right? Like talent is the other critical factor here. And if you don't have, to your point, the problem well formulated with a clear business value statement, how do you measure that it's going to be successful, and how do you get that buy-in to actually take it into production? But I'll go back to what I said earlier. I still think the biggest problem is just, 80% of the problem is data prep and data quality. But yeah, business value realization, clear business problem formulation, and a way to measure that is really, really important.
Yeah. So we are talking about mostly big businesses. What about SMEs? Do the same factors apply to them? They have fewer resources to work with.
Yeah, I think the ROI for them is questionable, right? How much resources do they want to put into, really get the benefits out? That would be a big question mark for them. And if you're SME, I think you're stretched on resources as well to be able to put in this investment before you can see it in the longer term being reaped, right?
Yeah.
And I think we often forget that AI doesn't need to solve everything. Descriptive analytics still has a place. Machine learning still has a place.
Yes.
Standard classical predictive analytic techniques. You don't necessarily need a large language model to do that if you're an SMB.
But in your engagement with customers, how are your enterprises maximizing the value of data?
Yeah. So I'll go into the technology part of it because I think you covered the other aspects well. I think a couple of things. Number one, when you think about everything that we've discussed, we've probably glossed over a really, really fundamental point that goes back to what I said around the data consistency and the format of the data. The lowest common denominator needs to be having an open data format. You got to make sure that you're defining an open data format and an open data standard for your data platforms, wherever they reside, whether they're centralized or federated. Why is that important? It gives you safe interoperability, gives you safe integration, but it gives you a safe exit strategy. So should you choose to do so, or should you need to do so, you can repatriate workloads back on-prem, you can move them between clouds, you can even distribute them across multiple clouds. Right. So, number one principle is you got to figure out an open data standard and an open data format. Super, super important. On top of that, you then need to layer on a couple of key capabilities. The whole data governance security discussion that we had earlier fundamentally usually comes down to a technology called a catalog. So you got to have a catalog. I think of it as, I like to think about the librarian where they know where every single book is. The catalog is being a way to know where all your data is, who's touched it, how is it secured, how is it governed, how is it changing. Really, really important. But again, the catalog needs to be centralized, needs to be open. So you really need to think about an open standard for that as well. Because what happens if you put it in and you can't get it out?
Right.
You're stuck. So you've got to make sure that's built on open standards and has an open core for interoperability as well. And then you need to think about the engine that you put on top of that. You need an engine that's going to allow you to ingest and transform and query. Super important. We see a lot of companies using many, many different engines. We would argue you need to radically simplify that. The more engines you have in play, the more steps, the more difficult lineage becomes, the harder it is to know how that data has changed and how it's been modified. So simplify your engine and ideally, again, use an open engine that's got open standards on top of it. Then you can layer on the other cool stuff like data visualization, data science, machine learning, AI, and ideally find a platform or a set of technologies that has that open core and allows that to happen in an open and interoperable way.
Yeah, what about multimodal data? Does that work? Do you see a lot of implementations this year?
They have structured data, maybe well kept, well stored, well processed. The interoperability between the unstructured and the structured is not quite there yet. And
so that needs
I
working
see there
on.
is a gap,
Yeah, again, I think it comes down to the data format and the choices that you make there. Some formats are more inclined to allow for that to be pretty seamless. So you can both ingest and store and query, both structured and unstructured, whether it's images, whether it's video, whether it's audio. So I think it comes back to the point around choosing that data format's really, really, really important.
I must add that data quality in an unstructured format or unstructured data is viewed differently. It has to be assessed differently. When Nick said about completeness, accuracy, and all that, when you look at unstructured data, how do you view accuracy metrics? What is completeness, right? And that relies a lot on manual, reviews as well.
Can you give an example?
So, for example, if I had a voice recording of a customer agent,
Yep.
and whatever he's recorded on the phone and the text reads, right?
Yeah.
What's the accuracy match, right?
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So, and because I'm going to use that recording into the data, onto the large language models or
And that's
Gen
going to
AI.
train again.
Yes, that's right. So there's a lot of those matching that has to happen before you go into the large language model.
So is that the human in the loop that
Yes, that's
needs to
right.
do that?
Human in the loop,
So it's
right?
quite tedious.
It's quite tedious. As I understand now, everything just goes in. I'm not sure if anyone's looking at this. Right? Yeah.
I would always advocate for a human in the loop, to be
Yes.
clear, but there are techniques that allow for models to judge other models. So LLM as a judge is a technique which is emerging, which is pretty successful. So we can take some of that mundane sort of aspects out of the process. But you're right. Like I think at the end of the day, it's not about taking the human out of the loop. It's putting the human in the loop and to validate what the models are doing. And if the models are judging each other, to make sure that they're aligning and conforming with the standards and the best practices in the org. Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered infrastructure, the data, we've covered inferencing, we've covered costs, we covered data storage, hybrid, and platforms. I want to talk about as closing, what is it that you see developing in the future? So, Nick, in terms of the tech advancement in data and analytics and AI, what is going to happen or advance in the next 12 to 18 months?
I think a couple of things. I think these large language models, they are definitely here to stay. But I think companies creating their own large language models, that's going to become the space of a few. And it's going to be predominantly the big tech players.
Right.
As we've seen with Meta, Zuckerberg, Facebook, they've done a phenomenal job with the Llama models.
Right.
Why would you want to go and compete against that?
Right.
Like the power, the extent of engineering effort and the muscle that they have behind that and the pace at which that is evolving, why would you go and try and build that?
Would you see the development of small language models?
Both. Again, I don't think there's ever going to be one model to rule them all. I think you're going to have to get into a world where you experiment fast with these models and you test and validate which models work best for you, whether discretely or as part of these agentic frameworks going forward. And I think, again, the agentic frameworks it's here to stay, right? Everything is going to move that way, such that the models themselves are reasoning, they're orchestrating themselves. You can always have the human in the loop, but it's never going to be one model operating discretely. It's going to be a combination of models acting as agents that's going to start to build differentiated workflows and products and services going forward.
Yeah, I just wanted to tap on what he said about agentic workflow, because that would then lead into the DNA of organizations, how you create that workflow for each of the modules that we put to the agentic workflows. It's related to your DNA. How have you done your processes in the past that you want this to be taken over by the modules? Yeah.
People won't like me saying this, but I've been saying this for a while. Back in the day, you remember something called business process management and business process engineering? It's going to come back because it's really important. You don't want to build that workflow out without understanding the business processes that exist today.
Right.
So I think a big part of the next sort of wave of change is going to be more business process modeling and engineering to actually understand what's the best way to serve the customer and then build the appropriate workflow underneath that.
Okay, so Geraldine, from your perspective of a business, what is the mindset change you hope to see in enterprises in order for them to harness, leverage data and AI?
Today, a lot of the mindset that we have is more from a data and tech perspective. If you show a person or a business person that Gen AI can summarize a document, more often than not, they will use it just to do that specific task. My hope is that they will expand it to many other problem statements that they see within their day-to-day. Because I've worked with the legal folks, the compliance folks, and the moment they are able to see and tap on the tools that they use for, hey, this problem statement, can it be used with this tool? Then it opens up their minds. It's almost like a tutor telling you how to do a problem in this manner.
Aha moment,
right? And then the moment the question changes, they go, oh, actually, can I use that for this as well? Right? And I think it's for the businesses to discover for themselves only by using the tool and discovering what features they have that they're able to say, can I use it for this problem, that other problem, and that expands their armory of AI skills that they have as well.
So is that training creating a greater awareness? For
Awareness and
business?
habits as
And
well.
habits,
Yeah,
okay.
it's a little bit of a habit, a change management, if I may say. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Geraldine and Nick, for that interesting conversation, explaining this intricate dance between data and AI, and for illuminating the relationship between the two. Thank you, listeners, for listening to us. Please check out this podcast at YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And do leave a review for us. Thank you.